Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty fascinating, at least to me, and that's the intersection of psychology and religion.
Ooh.
Specifically, we're diving into Carl Jung
Hey.
and his ideas about how the unconscious mind interacts with religious ideas and concepts.
Right.
I think what makes this so interesting is that it really challenges that idea that religion is purely like a conscious choice.
Yeah.
It almost suggests that maybe there are these deeper forces at play that we don't even realize.
And you know what's so fascinating about Jung
Yeah.
is that he approaches religion from like the perspective of an empiricist. He wasn't interested in proving or disproving any religious doctrines.
Yeah.
It was more about the psychological reality of those experiences. Like, what does it mean for us on a human level?
It's not about like saying this religion is right, this one is wrong. It's really more about understanding like that human need for this,
Yes.
regardless of what the specific beliefs are.
Ex-
And so I think to do that, Jung had to kind of define religion in a way that was different than maybe how we traditionally think about it.
Totally, yeah.
So how did he define religion?
So he defined it as like a careful and scrupulous observation of what he called the numinosum.
The numinosum.
Yeah, and this is like a powerful concept. It refers to these experiences that evoke a sense of awe or wonder or even sometimes fear. That feeling of encountering something so much greater than yourself.
I feel like I've definitely felt that before. I don't know if you have.
Oh, for sure.
But like, if you're out hiking in the mountains or you see like a beautiful sunset and you just get that sense of like awe
Yeah.
and like, whoa, there's something so much bigger than myself.
Yes, that's like a perfect example.
Okay.
Jung would say that's tapping into the numinosum, like that sense of something bigger than ourselves.
And so he believed that these numinous experiences, regardless of whether we call them religious or not, that they originate in the unconscious mind.
Right.
So we've got this vast unconscious mind that we're not always even aware of.
Yeah.
That can generate these like intense, really powerful experiences, the numinosum.
Right.
But how does that play out, I guess, like in our everyday life?
Well, Jung believed that neuroses, which are those patterns of thought and behavior that cause us distress, he thought those offered a glimpse into the workings of the unconscious. So he gives this really fascinating example of a patient who was convinced that he had intestinal cancer.
Oh, wow.
But all of the medical tests showed that there was nothing wrong.
So like an imaginary cancer.
Essentially, yes.
Wow, it's wild.
So Jung believed this patient was actually grappling with what he called a complex. So imagine like this part of you that has its own agenda, and it's operating behind the scenes, and it's influencing your choices without you even realizing it.
Oh, wow.
That's what Jung called a complex. It's like an unconscious cluster of thoughts and emotions.
Yeah. That can have a powerful impact on our behavior. Almost like a hidden puppet master.
Exactly.
It's kind of pulling our strings without us even realizing it. That's fascinating and kind of unnerving at the same time.
Yeah.
But like, how do we even begin to understand these complexes?
Well, for Jung, dreams were like a primary source of information about the unconscious. He believed that dreams often contain these same complexes that we find in neuroses.
So our dreams are like these secret messages from the unconscious.
Yes, exactly.
That's pretty cool. I've always been fascinated by dreams.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, most of the time, I just forget them as soon as I wake up.
I think a lot of us do.
Yeah.
But Jung believed that paying attention to our dreams was crucial for understanding ourselves.
Yeah.
And he observed this in the Elgoni tribe in East Africa.
Okay.
They traditionally viewed dreams as the voice of God, or what they call Mungu. But then, when the district commissioner, like this very rational authority figure, arrived, they reported having fewer dreams.
Oh.
They said they no longer needed them because the commissioner knows everything.
Interesting.
It's almost as if the arrival of a rational explanation, like, diminished their need for this more symbolic unconscious one.
I wonder if maybe it didn't diminish their need, but just changed their interpretation of it.
That's possible, yeah.
Like maybe the dreams were still there, but now they're not seeing it as this voice of Mungu anymore.
Right, exactly.
Because now there's this new authority figure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And it speaks to how our conscious attitudes can shape our understanding of what's coming from the unconscious.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to shift gears a little bit and look at an example of how this religious symbolism can actually pop up in dreams.
Okay.
even for someone who isn't particularly religious.
Right.
Jung talks about this patient that he had who had this dream that was packed with religious imagery, even though he himself was indifferent to religion. It's a perfect example of how these symbols can emerge from the unconscious, even when we don't consciously identify with them.
Right.
So what happens in this dream?
So in this dream, the patient finds himself in a crowd, and they're gathered for some kind of religious ceremony.
Okay.
And there's this figure that's leading the ceremony. But he feels this strong sense of disapproval towards him. He then hears the crowd chanting, "We confess that we are under the power of the Lord."
Wow.
And a woman standing next to him nods in agreement. But then suddenly this other woman appears and then vanishes just as quickly. And then finally there's this booming voice that just declares, "Do not flatter your benefactor."
That's a strange dream.
Yeah, it's really weird and unsettling.
Yeah, it seems like the imagery of the ceremony itself points to a specific kind of religion, one that's focused on authority and submission.
Right, because they're all chanting together, like, "We are under the power of the Lord."
Yeah, it suggests this blind obedience or passive acceptance without any real personal engagement. Yeah.
And then you add that final message, "Do not flatter your benefactor."
Right.
It's almost like the dream is giving him this warning against relying on, like, external authorities or these empty rituals for, like, spiritual fulfillment.
Exactly. It seems to be critiquing a corrupted or, like, ineffective form of religion, one that's devoid of genuine spiritual experience.
I feel like this is so relevant
to
today's world, where there's so much emphasis on, like, the outward appearances and blind faith. But it kind of begs the question then, if this traditional form of religion isn't working, what might a genuine spiritual experience look like?
Well, in the very next dream that this patient has, he has a vision that offers a really surprising answer.
Okay.
And it revolves around this really powerful symbol that's fascinated people for centuries.
Okay, what is it?
The mandala.
Now, this is where it gets interesting.
So he has a vision of what he calls like a world clock.
Okay.
And there are these two circles. One is blue and it's rotating vertically. The other one's gold and it's rotating horizontally. Within that gold circle, there are four colors: red, green, yellow, and blue. And then there are four little men that are standing at each of the cardinal points.
Interesting.
It's very precise and geometric, but what's even more striking is his reaction to it.
Okay.
He describes it as an experience of most sublime harmony.
Wow.
Like a feeling of complete peace and wholeness. He even uses the word conversion to describe its impact.
That's pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
It seems like something has really shifted in his unconscious.
Yeah, it's a pretty big shift from that previous dream.
For sure.
Yeah. So what does it all mean?
Right.
Like, why would this very abstract symbol evoke such a powerful feeling?
Yeah, to understand that we need to, like, take a detour into the historical context of the mandala.
Okay, let's do it.
So Jung points out that while this dream might seem very modern, the mandala symbol itself has incredibly deep roots. He draws these parallels between the dream imagery and some really fascinating concepts from history, including Plato's Anima Mundi, the medieval Rex Gloriae, and even, like, alchemical ideas.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Let's break it down.
Okay, let's start with Plato's Anima Mundi, which is the soul of the world.
Okay.
It's this idea that the cosmos is like a harmonious, living being.
Right.
And the mandala, with its, like, perfect circles and colors, it kind of echoes that vision. So it's like the dream is tapping into this ancient idea of cosmic order, of everything being interconnected and, like, in its right place.
Yeah, I like that.
Then there's the medieval symbolism of the four cardinal points and the four seasons. The Rex Gloriae, the king of glory and his attendants, who are often depicted in these circular mandalas. So it's like the dream is drawing on this rich visual language to represent wholeness and completeness.
And then we have the significance of the number 4.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
The quaternity played a huge role in medieval philosophy and alchemy. And it often represented like a complement to the Christian Trinity, a symbol of wholeness and integration. Think of like the 4 elements, the 4 humors, the 4 gospel.
Yeah, it really pops up everywhere.
It does. And then we have alchemy.
Oh, yeah.
With its obsession with circles and squares.
Right.
And the transformation of base matter into gold, which was not only a material goal, but it also symbolized spiritual enlightenment.
It's so fascinating how all these ideas come together in the mandala.
It is. And here's the kicker. In modern mandalas, the traditional image of God is often replaced by the self.
Ah, the self.
Yes.
One of Jung's favorite archetypes.
Yeah, so the self, in Jungian psychology, represents the archetype of wholeness and integration.
Okay.
But within the individual. It's the potential for each of us to become a complete and unified being.
Yeah.
And to incorporate all aspects of our personality, even what Jung called the shadow.
Oh, interesting.
And what's so remarkable is that this process, it seems to happen unconsciously, like we see in this mandala dream.
Right, and it suggests that there's this inherent drive within the psyche towards self-regulation and individuation.
Right, it's becoming a unique whole person.
Yeah.
But it's not always an easy process.
And this is where the shadow comes in, right?
Exactly.
That part of ourselves that we tend to reject or repress.
Right, and Jung believed that confronting that shadow, those less desirable aspects of our personality, is essential for psychological health.
If we don't, what happens?
Well, we risk projecting those unwanted traits onto others.
Oh.
And that can lead to all sorts of conflicts and misunderstandings.
Right. So how does this all relate back to religion? Especially for those who, they don't identify with any traditional belief system.
That's a great question, and I think one that Jung was grappling with throughout his work.
Yeah.
He recognized that even people who aren't religious in, the conventional sense, they can still have these profound experiences that resemble religious conversion.
Like that's our mandala dreamer.
Exactly.
So what's going on there? Why is that happening?
Well, it's possible that the mandala and other similar symbols, they represent an attempt by the unconscious to grapple with these powerful, numinous forces within the individual psyche, even in the absence of those traditional religious frameworks.
So if the image of God, like how it's traditionally conceived, is fading for a lot of people, what new forms of spiritual experience and meaning-making might emerge from the depths of the unconscious? That's something to think about.
It is.
It is.
And perhaps the mandala, with its rich symbolism and its message of wholeness and integration, offers a clue.
I think it definitely does.
Yeah.
And speaking of the mandala, you remember how the one in the dream had those 4 little men?
Yes.
With the cardinal points?
Very distinct imagery.
Jung actually dives into what those mean, too.
Oh, yeah.
He points out that these little men, they're like dwarves, or what are called kabires?
Kabires?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar.
So they were these mythical beings in ancient Greece, associated with blacksmithing and craftsmanship, but also with mysteries and the underworld. Jung connects them to a medieval text called Le Pèlerinage de l'Homme.
Wow. Right.
Where the author describes a vision of heaven with a golden sphere that contains 4 colors.
Hold on.
Red, green, yellow, and blue.
So just like our patient's dream.
Just like our patient's dream.
Wow, that's a pretty wild coincidence.
It's almost like these archetypal images and symbols, they transcend time and culture. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So in the medieval text, this golden sphere represents the divine realm. And the 4 colors symbolize the 4 elements, the 4 cardinal points, even the 4 evangelists. And remember how he described his mandala as a world clock?
Yeah.
The medieval text also uses that metaphor of a clock to describe the cosmos.
So it's all about this idea of a harmonious, ordered universe.
Guided by a divine intelligence.
Yes, exactly.
But there's a twist, right?
Oh, there is.
Jung mentions that the number 4, while super important in many spiritual traditions, is notably absent from the traditional Christian dogma of the Trinity.
Okay, so the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
Right, and he points out that while the Trinity represents the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the quaternity, like the addition of that 4th element, often represents wholeness and completion. Think of like the classic image of Christ in a mandala.
Okay.
Surrounded by the 4 evangelists.
Right.
So it's almost like the unconscious is trying to compensate for something that's missing to create a more complete picture of the divine.
That's such a fascinating idea.
It's like the psyche is naturally drawn to these symbols of wholeness and integration, even if they challenge or expand upon traditional religious doctrines.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting is that this is all happening unconsciously.
Right.
The patient didn't set out to create a mandala or draw on all this medieval symbolism.
Yeah.
emerged spontaneously from his psyche.
And that's what makes Jung's work so compelling.
Totally.
It suggests that there's this deep wisdom within us, this creative force that's constantly seeking to express itself, even in the most unexpected ways.
Yeah, I love that.
But it's not always easy to access that wisdom, is it?
No, it's not.
And I think that brings us back to the shadow, right? Yeah. Those aspects of ourselves that we tend to repress.
Right. And Jung believed that confronting that shadow is essential for this process of individuation, of becoming a whole person.
It's not about being perfect, right? It's not about being morally flawless.
Right.
It's about integrating all parts of ourselves.
Right.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
The whole thing.
Yeah. And that includes recognizing our own projections, right?
Yeah.
Because Jung talked about how we often project those unwanted aspects of ourselves onto other people.
Yes, and if we're not careful, those projections can lead to all sorts of conflict and misunderstandings.
Yeah, he even connects this to the rise of totalitarian regimes.
Oh, wow.
Where an entire nation will project its shadow onto an enemy.
Wow.
Justifying violence and oppression in the name of righteousness.
It's a chilling reminder.
It really is.
Of how our unconscious patterns can manifest on this large scale.
Yeah.
Impacting not just our personal lives, but the world around us as well.
So it highlights the importance of each of us doing our own shadow work.
Yeah.
So that we can contribute to a more conscious and compassionate world.
Exactly.
So how do we go about doing this shadow work?
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Well, as we mentioned before, Jung believed that dreams they offer a really valuable tool for accessing the unconscious and for gaining insights into our shadow.
Yeah.
You know, he saw those dreams as a nightly report from the unconscious.
Right. And he also talked about that technique called active imagination.
Yes, exactly.
So active imagination, remind us what that is.
So active imagination is a way of consciously engaging with the unconscious.
Okay.
And you could do this by dialoguing with the figures and symbols that appear in your dreams.
So it's like having a conversation with your own unconscious.
Exactly.
That's fascinating and also a little intimidating.
It can be challenging at first.
Yeah.
But with practice, it can become a really powerful way to tap into that wisdom and guidance of the unconscious. It's about cultivating a relationship with those deeper parts of ourselves, learning to listen to their messages, and to integrate their insights into our conscious life.
Which I think this brings us back to this concept of individuation, which I find so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's this idea that we're all on this lifelong journey of becoming more fully ourselves.
Yes.
And it's not about like achieving some idealized state of perfection.
Right, exactly.
It's about embracing the messiness and the complexity and even the contradictory nature of being human.
Absolutely.
It's about integrating all parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
The light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious into a whole and harmonious self.
Beautiful.
And, you know, thinking back to the mandala symbol and that patient's experience of sublime harmony, like, I wonder if that's what it feels like to tap into that deeper level of wholeness.
It's certainly a possibility.
Within ourselves.
Yeah. And Jung believed that this journey of individuation, it's not just for our own personal benefit.
Right.
But it also has implications for the world around us.
Because the more whole and integrated we are as individuals, the more we can contribute to creating like a more just and harmonious society.
Precisely. Jung believed that the state of the world reflects the state of our collective psyche.
Wow.
So as more people engage in this inner work of individuation and shadow integration, it creates this ripple effect, this collective shift in consciousness that has the potential to really transform the world.
That's such a hopeful thought.
It is.
It reminds me of that Gandhi quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Yeah.
It all starts with each of us doing our own inner work. It's a lifelong journey.
It is.
Full of challenges, but also rewards.
Wow.
It's about embracing the unknown, being willing to confront our shadow, and trusting that there's a deeper wisdom within us guiding us
along
towards wholeness. This has been such a rich and thought-provoking deep dive so far.
I agree.
I know I'm going to be pondering these ideas for a while.
Yeah, me too.
I wonder what our listeners thinking right now.
Yeah, I'm curious to know.
I hope they're as fascinated by this as we are, but I'm sure they are.
I'm sure.
Well, we'll be back.
We will.
To continue exploring this in just a little bit.
Can't wait.
It's really amazing how even when we think we're totally indifferent to religion, all of these powerful symbols and archetypes can still pop up in our unconscious. It's almost like there's this deeper layer of ourselves that's still looking for meaning and connection, even if we don't consciously subscribe to a specific belief.
It really highlights how we're not always in control of what emerges from the unconscious.
Yeah.
Like, it has its own language, its own way of communicating with us.
Speaking of that unconscious language, I want to hear more about this shadow concept that keeps coming up. It seems to be a pretty key part of this whole journey towards wholeness that Jung's talking about.
It is. It's also the most challenging part, too.
Why is that?
Well, the shadow represents those aspects of ourselves that we just deem unacceptable. The parts that we try to hide or deny, both from ourselves and others.
So, like, what kind of things fall into that shadow category?
It could be anything from anger and aggression to envy and insecurity. Really, it's those parts of ourselves that we've learned to associate with shame or guilt.
Right.
The things that we've been told are bad or wrong.
It makes me think of that saying.
Yeah.
The things that bother us about other people are often reflections of the things we dislike in ourselves.
Exactly. Jung believed we often project our shadow onto others. We see in them the qualities that we're most afraid to acknowledge in ourselves. And this can lead to so many problems in our relationships and even in society as a whole.
It's almost like we're constantly at war with this part of ourselves that we haven't fully accepted yet.
Yes.
But how do we begin to face those elements?
Right.
It sounds really intimidating.
It can be daunting, but Jung believed that confronting that shadow is essential for psychological health and for becoming a whole person. But he saw it as a process of integration, not eradication. It's not about getting rid of those shadow elements, but about acknowledging them, understanding them, and learning to relate to them in a healthier way.
So it's more about making peace with the shadow than trying to just, like, banish it completely.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And this process of shadow work, it can involve a lot of different approaches, from dream analysis to therapy to creative expression.
Yeah, I imagine it involves a lot of honesty.
Oh, absolutely.
And self-compassion, too.
Totally.
Yeah, because it's so easy to judge those parts of ourselves that we deem unacceptable.
Right.
But maybe the first step is just acknowledging that they're there.
Exactly. Recognizing that we're all these complex beings with both light and shadow sides.
Yeah.
And embracing that shadow rather than fearing it is ultimately what allows us to become more whole and integrated.
This whole conversation about the shadow makes me think back to that patient's dream of the religious ceremony.
Yes.
You remember how it seemed like it was critiquing a form of religion that was based on just blind obedience and external authority?
Yes, I remember.
Could it be that that dream was also pointing to kind of a collective shadow? Where we as a society project our own power and responsibility onto external authorities? Whether it's like a religious figure or a political leader or even like a social media influencer.
That's a really insightful connection.
Yeah.
Jung was really concerned about the dangers of those collective shadow projections.
Yeah.
Especially in the context of like totalitarian regimes.
Right.
Where entire nations can project their shadow onto an enemy, justifying all sorts of violence and oppression in the name of righteousness.
That's a chilling reminder.
It is.
That our unconscious patterns can manifest on a much larger scale.
Absolutely.
Impacting not just our personal lives,
right,
but like the entire world around us.
It highlights how important it is that each of us do our own shadow work to become aware of our biases and projections so that we can contribute to a more conscious and compassionate world.
So how do we go about doing that? Like, how do we do that shadow work? Where do we even begin?
Well, Jung believed that dreams offer a really valuable tool for accessing the unconscious.
Okay.
And for gaining insights into our shadow.
Right, that nightly report from the unconscious.
Exactly.
And you also talked about active imagination.
Yes.
So active imagination, just to remind us, what is that?
So active imagination is a way of consciously engaging with the unconscious.
Okay.
And it often involves dialoguing with the figures and symbols that appear in our dreams.
So it's like having a conversation with your unconscious.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
It can be challenging at first.
Yeah, that sounds a little daunting.
It can be.
Yeah.
But with practice, it can be a really powerful way to tap into that wisdom and guidance of the unconscious. It's about cultivating a relationship with those deeper parts of ourselves.
Okay.
Learning to listen to their messages.
Right.
And integrate their insights into our conscious lives.
I think this brings us back to this concept of individuation.
Yes.
Which I find so fascinating.
It is fascinating.
This idea that we're all on this lifelong journey of becoming more fully ourselves. And it's not about achieving some idealized state of perfection.
Right, exactly.
It's about embracing the messiness, the complexity, even the contradictory nature of being human.
Absolutely.
And integrating all parts of ourselves, the light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, into this whole harmonious self.
I love that.
It's not about becoming someone else.
Right.
It's about becoming more fully who we already are.
Exactly.
I don't know if you feel this way, but thinking back to the mandala symbol and the patient's experience of like sublime harmony, I wonder if that's what it feels like to access that deeper level of wholeness.
I think that's a real possibility.
Within ourselves.
Yeah.
And Jung believed that this journey of individuation isn't just for our own personal benefit.
Right. It's not.
He thinks it has these implications for the world around us, too.
Exactly.
So the more whole and integrated we are as individuals, the more we can contribute to creating a more just and harmonious society.
Precisely. Jung believed that the state of the world reflects the state of our collective psyche.
So as more and more people engage in this inner work of individuation and shadow integration, it creates this ripple effect, this collective shift in consciousness that really has the potential to transform the world.
Right. It's a hopeful thought.
It really is hopeful.
It is.
It reminds me of that Gandhi quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world."
Yes, absolutely.
It all starts with us doing our own inner work.
It all starts with us.
So it's a lifelong journey.
Yes, it is.
Full of challenges and rewards.
Right.
And it's about embracing the unknown, being willing to confront our own shadow, and trusting that there's this deeper wisdom within us that's guiding us towards wholeness.
It's beautiful.
I don't know about you, but this has definitely sparked a lot of reflection for me.
Me too.
It's making me think about my own dreams, my own shadow elements.
Right.
And my own journey towards wholeness.
That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey. We all have a shadow.
Yeah.
And we all have the potential to become more whole and integrated beings.
I think our listeners probably feeling similarly inspired.
I hope so.
To do a little introspection.
Yeah, it's such a valuable and rewarding process. And if we can each just do our own part, it really does have the potential to create a more compassionate and harmonious world.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so powerful how Jung connects personal growth to this bigger societal transformation. Like, it's not just about us trying to improve ourselves, but recognizing that our individual journeys actually have this ripple effect on the world around us. It's almost like, I don't know, a spiritual form of activism.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that this inner work that we're doing, it's not selfish, it's not self-indulgent.
Right.
It's actually this profound act of service to the world.
Yeah.
When we confront our shadow, we contribute to like this collective healing, a shift away from projection and conflict towards more understanding and compassion.
I think so much of what we've talked about today points to this idea that we're not just these isolated individuals, we're interconnected in ways that we probably don't even fully grasp.
Absolutely. Jung believed there's a collective unconscious. This shared reservoir of images and symbols and archetypes that we all tap into. And the more we become aware of those unconscious patterns, both individually and collectively, the more we can consciously choose how we want to shape the world.
It makes me think of how throughout history, like, there have been these periods of great social and cultural upheaval. Often accompanied by a new spiritual movement. And these shifts in consciousness.
That's a great observation. It's as if during times of like crisis or transition, that collective unconscious becomes more active. And these new symbols and archetypes, they emerge to guide us towards a new way of being.
So if, as Jung observed, the traditional image of God is kind of fading for a lot of people, maybe it's not necessarily a sign of spiritual decline, but rather an invitation to explore these new forms of spiritual experience and meaning-making.
I think that's a really hopeful perspective.
Yeah.
It challenges us to be open to the unexpected, to trust that there's a deeper wisdom that's guiding us, even when things feel really uncertain or chaotic.
Yeah, maybe that's what the mandala ultimately represents. A symbol of this innate drive that we have towards wholeness and integration, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
And it's a process that requires both courage and compassion. You know, courage to confront our shadow, and compassion to embrace ourselves and others with all of our imperfections.
This has been such a rich and thought-provoking deep dive.
It has.
I know I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time.
Me too.
Is there anything else you want to leave our listener with before we wrap up?
I would just encourage them to approach this whole journey of self-discovery with a sense of curiosity and openness. Pay attention to your dreams. Engage in active imagination. And just trust that there's a deeper wisdom within you that's guiding you towards your own unique path. To wholeness.
That's beautiful.
And remember, you're not alone in this journey.
That's so important to remember.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
And for sharing your expertise on Jung and the unconscious mind.
My pleasure.
I know our listener has learned a lot from this deep dive.
I hope so.
And to our listener, we hope this has inspired you and given you a sense of curiosity.
Absolutely.
So keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
Yes.
And keep diving deep into those mysteries of the human experience.
Yes.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.
See you then.